it also can help you identify where the problem might be a little bit more complicated than if there's none of that history there. So, you might have a form for a comprehensive exam and then a form for a follow-up visit, for example. And you can be even really specific in terms of, we know that patients with glaucoma who are on glaucoma medications, we might actually want to ask more questions about their ocular surface symptoms and other signs. And so based on our AOA clinical practice guidelines, so that might be a way that you would tailor your glaucoma follow-up history differently than your comprehensive exam. Hello and welcome to the Chris Wolfe Podcast on iCode Media. Today, I want to talk about your history, your intake form. This really harkens back to, and this is going to be a monologue today. So as always, be sure to subscribe to the podcast, write a review, share it with your friends, and support those who support us. The most common questions I get include, what ophthalmological codes or evaluation and management codes should I use? What ICD-10 codes do I need to bill with this CPT code? What CPT codes can be billed together and what can't? And my favorite, how do I manage a patient who has diabetes who comes in for a quote-unquote routine eye exam? These questions really highlight the confusion and uncertainty that serves as a daunting hurdle for providers, makes it more challenging for them to care for their patients and provide those patients with the best opportunity for a lifetime of ocular health and clear vision. That's why we built iCode Education, for this specific purpose. Our mission is to provide optometrists with resources to help you understand disease states, revenue cycles, and billing and coding so that you can put that on autopilot and truly care for your patients. Check out iCodeEducation.com. That's EYECODE education.com. We've developed a premier billing and coding bundle that includes all of our billing and coding resources in one place. We also have a 10% discount code just for listeners of this podcast. Enter the coupon code EYECODEMEDIA22 at checkout. We'd love to work with you. Check out iCodeEducation.com. Hello, dedicated optometrists. Are you looking for a way to support your patient's vision and overall eye health? Let me introduce you to Vision Edge Pro, a visual performance supplement that stands out in our profession. Vision Edge Pro contains a balanced blend of mesozeaxanthine, lutein, and zeaxanthine in a 10-10-2 ratio. This combination has been scientifically shown to increase macular pigment density, which enhances visual performance, including contrast sensitivity and vision in glare situations. Additionally, Vision Edge Pro provides 300 milligrams of DHA and EPA, fulfilling the daily requirements for omega-3s as recognized by the leading health organizations. This ensures your patients receive the essential nutrients their eyes need for optimal health. Whether it's for everyday screen use, night driving, or enjoying the outdoors, Vision Edge Pro supports your patients in seeing their best. Recommend Vision Edge Pro for your patients today and help them achieve clearer, healthier vision. Contact your local MacuHealth representative for more details. Vision Edge Pro, because your patients deserve the best in eye health. Go to MacuHealth.com and use the coupon code PODCAST2024 at checkout for special discounts. So this harkens back to what Kyle Clutie and I had developed about 4 years ago now, which is called Total Patient Care. And the whole idea is for us to be able to separate what patients need for chronic ocular disease management and other sort of what people are calling specialty services, things like myopia management, binocular vision, neurorehabilitation, into these sort of pillars. And this all comes down to the idea that, as this has become more and more clear over time to me, is that our comprehensive exams, we have sort of thought about them as in terms of comprehensive, meaning I have to go both broad and deep on every single condition. But the challenge there is that if I go broad and deep, I'm never going to have enough time to do that in the confines of a comprehensive exam. So instead, we can understand what our comprehensive exams are requiring of us, both from a patient responsibility, meaning we have a responsibility to the patient, but also what our clinical practice guidelines are requiring of us, as well as what insurance companies are requiring of us through those comprehensive exams. And the bottom line is that it becomes very complicated for us to try to shove everything we're supposed to do to dive deep and broad in all the things that we're supposed to cover. So that brings us to history. And I wanted you to think about the last time that you really evaluated your history form. I know it seems really simple, but when was the last time that you looked at the questions on your history form and really cared about the answers? Unless the patient told you something else, or unless there was something else that you found. And this is not me advocating for not doing a history, but what I'm advocating for is to really question yourself about the questions you're asking on your history form. Do you really care about the answers? And so this came up a couple times. So recently it came up a couple times. One is about a year ago, I was doing a billing and coding workshop with Aaron Warner, and we were sort of pushing the idea of when a patient comes in and has some specific complaint, do you have to do all the things in a comprehensive exam that are required, or can you just take care of that complaint? And one of the doctors in the audience, then we kind of got into a discussion about the history that we're evaluating, what we might call a comprehensive history. And the doctor got really upset with me, really upset, and upset with Aaron to the point where he had to remove himself. And his answer was, when we asked him, why do you think you have to do all those things for a patient that has this one specific symptom? And it really boiled down. And his response to us was, I am a good person. And so that's why I feel like I need to do all those things. And I thought, wow, that's really interesting. And that level of commitment, if that's what your belief is, and that's clearly what his belief is, then he has that the comprehensive history and the comprehensive exam made him a good person. And actually, to say that a different way, in his eyes, it made us bad people because we were advocating for, when a patient comes in with a specific symptom, let's take care of that symptom and then have them back to dive deeper into the other things that we need to, right? It wasn't ignore the other things. It was, let's take care of the problem at hand and then move to a separation of that visit so we don't have to do everything at every time. And so he was advocating that every single time the patient comes in, you ought to do effectively a comprehensive exam because you wouldn't want to miss something and you want to be a good person. Now, this is not about him. This really dives deeper into what I have found recently. I'm not going to disclose kind of some of these other things, but his concern, my thought is that his concern was that he had a responsibility never to miss something. I can tell you the other side of dealing with history that is complete when you don't care, and an exam that is comprehensive when you don't necessarily care about all the elements of that exam because a patient symptom dictates a very specific evaluation, where that has gotten a doctor into a lot of trouble. And so I think there's both sides of this coin. So that also clarifies the idea for me is we should be asking history that matters. We should be thinking about the intake forms that we have in a way that makes us really care about those things. And the last point before I get into some of these other, some of the other details of kind of my advice when you review your history form is when we ask too broad of a history, focusing on lots of reviews of systems, right? Like, again, this is not about not asking review of systems, but when you have a patient sit down, I've listened to my techs, and they ask a lot of different things, but ultimately it boils down to, have you had any other changes in your medical history? And the patient says, most of the time says no. And we accept that, or we might dive a little bit deeper and say, well, have you had any problems or changes in your hearing? Have you had any changes in your skin? Have you ever, and the reality is that, like, do we really care most of the time we ask those questions? Now, we might ask about joint pain and GI problems, but we really care about them when maybe we see a patient with dry eye. We might ask about, mental confusion, GI upset, and then it all becomes a little bit, and our, joint pain, and then it all becomes a little bit more clear as to why we might be asking those questions. They matter. The history matters. But really, why do I care a ton about all the different review of systems every single time the patient comes in? You might, but you should really ask yourself, what do we really care about? So The whole point of this is with the everything history, it's too long. We waste time with irrelevant data that we don't even really care about in many cases. I would argue that you might not. And so I want you to reflect on the last time you actually used all the questions on your intake form during the comprehensive exam. Do you really care about them? If you do, great, awesome. Skip this, fast forward to the end, and hopefully the next one will be helpful for you. But if you want to focus on how to make history important during a comprehensive exam, what I would say is think about the most common conditions where nobody else outside of optometry or eye care globally would care about the answers to those questions more than you. CooperVision and the AOA have joined forces in a groundbreaking initiative to transform how optometrists treat children with myopia. The Myopia Collective aims to unite our profession and its allies to challenge the status quo and elevate the standard of care for children with myopia. Everyone is invited to become a member of the collective. By joining, you pledge to act in slowing childhood myopia progression. Membership includes regular updates and information about the collective's efforts, access to educational opportunities and resources, and insights from the ambassador optometrists who advocate for community policy and changes supporting the collective's mission. Click the link in the show notes to join the collective today. So as an example, are we missing questions on our history because we're too bogged down trying to check all the review of systems when a patient might be concerned about their history of macular degeneration or glaucoma or their burny, gritty, itchy eyes, or the fact that their kids might have myopia or so the point is that are there questions, are there both acute and chronic conditions where nobody else is going to be the advocate for that patient, and we are in the best place to be the advocate for that patient. So I think you can boil it down to, the common chronic diseases might be things like vitreomacular interface diseases, macular degeneration, peripheral retinal diseases, optic nerve diseases, specifically glaucoma, questions that would align you with being able to detect symptoms associated with cataracts, corneal diseases, other anterior segment diseases like dry eye. So, and then you can dive into like, okay, well, what about lifestyle questions? Most of us are pretty good with lifestyle questions, but are the lifestyle questions that we're asking, are they relevant to our patients today? Thinking about tailoring the questions you're asking to those chronic diseases and the history that can come with those chronic diseases, both in symptoms, family history, other problems that the patient may have. Now, all of a sudden, you're forcing these patients you're forcing yourself to ask questions and reflect on patient answers that nobody is in a better position than you are to manage for that patient. So then you want to sort of think about matching a complaint type to your intake. So thinking about the difference between the questions that I might have for a patient with an acute problem. They come in with the swollen eye or scratchiness, grittiness. That's their chief complaint, versus a comprehensive exam or a chronic visit. So, do I ask a different set of history for a red eye versus a different set of history for my glaucoma follow-ups, as an example? I think you ought to. If you think about a patient that has a red eye, an acute red eye, you might be asking about things like recent flare-ups or common, has this happened more than one time? Is there, other exposure issues in terms of having, sat next to, you do this naturally, but we might actually want to focus our history in those patients as we do the examination, as opposed to letting them take a whole entire comprehensive intake form. And then you might have one that's different for glaucoma evaluations, right? So your glaucoma evaluation, you might ask about any irritation or redness or side effects of treatment. Why? Because if that patient reports them, you want to be able to manage them. But two, from a billing standpoint, it also can help you identify where the problem might be a little bit more complicated than if there's none of that history there. So, you might have a form for a comprehensive exam and then a form for a follow-up visit, for example. And you can be even really specific in terms of, we know that patients with glaucoma who are on glaucoma medications, we might actually want to ask more questions about their ocular surface symptoms and other signs. And so based on our AOA clinical practice guidelines. So that might be a way that you would tailor your glaucoma follow-up history differently than your comprehensive exam. Then I think the most important part, once you've identified those, is that you care enough about the question that you'll act. So you can't just you can't just ask the question to document it, right? That's not the point. The point of the question is you care enough about the yes/no question or about the answer from the patient that you are compelled to remove your sense of rushed by trying to do everything during the comprehensive exam or trying to just get to the next patient, that the answer to that question will make you take action as a clinician. So, a dry eye complaint is always going to trigger in your mind, whatever that complaint is, you care about it enough that it's always going to trigger maybe an ocular surface evaluation or at that visit or some other visit. I've got my thoughts about that, but it ought to always trigger it. Maybe you're trying to incorporate a new widget in your practice. Maybe it is some new piece of technology, some new lens that can help patients with headaches. And so you might say, okay, well, anytime a patient has a symptom of fatigue or headaches when they're at the computer, that's gonna trigger some sort of other evaluation. Maybe I'm gonna pay more close attention to their foria measurements, or their accommodative system, or maybe I have some sort of widget that can measure those for me. So the point is that you're linking a symptom to a trigger that you care a lot about, and you're gonna dive deeper into, whether it's at that evaluation or at a separate evaluation. And then making it engaging for the patients, making it real for their life. So I think the fourth step is that the questions we ask should be meaningful so that they spark other conversation. If that's done on a form, it's really helpful if you've reviewed that form, obviously, and then you come back in, Mrs. Smith, I noticed that you're feeling a lot of tiredness at the computer. Tell me a little bit about that. Oh yeah, it's been going on for a while and it's kind of normal. Well, that's not a normal symptom. You don't have to, so you can start to, and then you can start to see patients change like, oh yeah, okay, this isn't something that I just have to live with. So again, the point is that once the whole goal of those questions is to force you to act, and then it can become more engaging with the patient so they really believe that you care about them as opposed to, I'm just trying to sell them something. And then think about your roadmap. So what I would say is as I sort of wrap up this episode, and we dive deeper into this. In fact, I'm developing an entire webinar related to this, and we really focus on this in Comprehensive Optometry Simplified. It's the entire first step within COS in terms of building your pillar. But the bottom line is, think about your existing forms. So if I were going to say, okay, here's what I want you to do. First phase is, I would say, audit your current form. Don't just have a form that you had from school or that you got a buddy from, in town that you like their form. It's got to mean something to you. So go through that form and start circling questions that you ask on every single comprehensive exam that you don't even care about, that you've probably never looked at, or that you may have never looked at in the last month, in the last quarter, that you just when was the last time somebody said something that actually caused me action? Now, if you don't want to get rid of them, fine, but you should ask other questions that you will act on for the sake of those questions if time becomes a constraint. Then rebuild. Phase 2 is, once you've identified that and eliminated those types of questions, is rebuild your intake form around potential complaints that a patient has where the likelihood that they have a condition that you are in the best place to manage for that patient will exist with a symptom. And then your third phase is just to refine over time. So as you care about more symptoms and history, then you can adjust when you're starting to be sort of complacent with the history that you have. And then, this should be an evolving process. Sort of, it's an ongoing change that will occur over time that you can continue to perfect and in your practice. And I think the last thing is, focus your history, shorten your history, make it actionable, make it easier for your patients, and make it matter for you. You want to think about the idea that a focused history form is available for you, that you don't have to be committed to forever. It's always evolving. And I think the last thing is, the best history isn't the longest form. The best history is the one that you care about as the clinician and is relevant to the patient for when they come into your practice. So I hope this was helpful. I hope you start thinking about your history forms, both in what you want to add, but also what you can take away and still think that you're providing great care to the patient, because that's what we want you to be able to do, is provide great care that you believe is in the patient's best interest. So I hope this was helpful. I'll see you guys on the next one.